provides a comprehensive quantitative analysis of the state democracy of Western Balkans. It utilizes variables from prominent democratic indices, including VDEM, Varieties of Democracy, and Freedom House, Freedoms in the World Report. The primary focus is exploring the intricate relationship between various indicators of democracy, such as political stability, governance quality, and civil liberties. In the late 20th century, influential thinkers Fukuyama, Huntington declared that liberal democracy is the ultimate governance. Freedoms and liberty were viewed as synonymous of happiness and prosperity. We are discussing here Albania, Bosnia, Herzegovina, North Macedonia, Montenegro, Kosovo, and Serbia. We are leaving Croatia outside because it's already part of the EU. Although these countries have distinct stories with different economic, cultural, and political variables, they can hardly be avoided considering them as connected realities. Each of the nations, while unique in their own right, share geographical proximity and complex web of historical interaction that intertwine their destinies in various ways. Except for Serbia, which delayed the communist fall, all countries created by the Yugoslavian disgregation in the first part of the 1990s of the last century. They adopted a parliamentary democracy. This is also true for Albania, which changed its political system shortly after coming from a severe communist regime. The scenario was optimistic at the beginning, since the liberal democracy seemed to be the ultimate political system. However, even if liberal democracy shines bright, its attainment is not so laid back. In the early 2010s, a delightful trend was becoming more accentuated. Liberal democracy had lost its expansion vigor, and many authors began to talk about democracy stalling or even democracy backsliding. This paper will utilize quantitative statistical approach to evaluate progress of democracy in the Western Balkans. Objective statistical methods include linear regression, quadratic regression, or ANOVA, or, when necessary, non-parametric tests, will be utilized to minimize the subjectivity of interpretation as much as possible. Many reputable institutions produce democracy indicators. As we said before, we'll use VDEM and Freedom House. Freedom House because it's one of the oldest democracy index and is used worldwide by government to assess their democracy or to NGOs and so on. Use VDEM because in the academia milieu is one of the most reputable indexes to be used. Variable we are going to check is political rights rating by Freedom House. This is a variable that takes scores from 1 to 7, where 1 is the best situation for a country and 7 is the worst one. We're going to analyze the years from 2013 to 2022. As we see from the graph, there is a plateau in almost all the country, except for Serbia, which has worsened its position, and for Kosovo, which has an improvement during these years. If we take a look at the mean of all Western countries in this variable, we see that the mean is 3.33, which is near the absolute average of the scores. So for this variable, the Western Balkan countries are at the middle of the road from 10 years without any improvement here. The second variable is also from the Freedom House. It's its second most important aggregated variable, and it measures the civil liberties. We also can notice here that the variable is almost flat. In more than 10 years, the region viewed as an entirety has not made any improvement. The mean here is 3.12, but in the last years, that means has worsened at 3.33, which is not a good sign for the Balkan countries. The next variable we're going to see is electoral democracy. Now, the variables are not from Freedom House, but from VDEM. VDEM variable electoral democracy measures the quality of electoral process. The exact name of this variable that we have measured is Clean Election Index. The Clean Election Index assesses to what extent the election are free and fair. This complex variable is calculated by more granular variables using point estimates from a Bayesian factor analysis model. These variables are not limited to election vote buying, election other irregularities, and election government intimidation. We have made a linear regression to measure if there is an improvement in the last 10 years in the Western Balkans countries taken as a whole entity. We see from these two tables here that there is no any improvements. Moreover, there is no linearity in the data. If we see in the table above, the R square is minimal. So the linear model is not fit to measure this data. In the table below, we can see the value of the sigma coefficient that is too high, which shows that all the changes of the data during the years are maybe due to randomness and not to any improvement at all. In this table also, where we can see the coefficients of the linear regression, we see that there is not any predictable improvement in the region. The second graph that we are showing here is an attempt by us to use quadratic regression in an attempt to explain the data better. But even in this case, we have a R-square quadratic that is too small to be taken as significantly by the statistical point of view. So no parametric test can be used with this data. This way, we have used a non-parametric test, a lowest regression. With this non-parametric test, we can see if there are more subtle changes that we can be modeled for these 10 years for these countries. And we see an almost flat line. So in the electoral process in these years, for these countries, there is no any improvement. But since the parametric tests are not suitable for the randomness of the data, we cannot predict any future trends. The second variable taken also from VDEM is the legislative constraint on executive. How effective is the legislative power to constrain, to limit the power of executive leaders? From the data we have here, we see the same situation. The legislative, unfortunately, is not becoming more powerful to limit executive leaders. If we take Serbia or Albania, for example, the executive leaders this decade are becoming more and more powerful. But for the region as a total, the situation is pretty much the same and nothing has been really changed. Also here, the linear model is not capable of describing this data. And the changes in this data are pretty much due to randomness and not to linearity. We again can take a look here to the sigma in the picture above, the sigma is too high. As the public know, the sigma should be less than or 0.05 to be meaningful, and this table shows us that the sigma is much higher than this, and we see that the R square is very, very low. In this case, the linear regression does not represent the data, and there is not any linearity in this data. This way, the next variable we are going to analyze is the judicial constraint on executive. But we have here a pretty same picture where the linear regression is not fixed to the data and the value of sigma is 0.355, and we can conclude that the changes are not linear, but more the changes are due to randomness. Also, in the table below, we see again that the coefficients are positive, but the sigma level is too high in order to represent linear data. Again, here we have made a graph that shows non-parametric regression line, and in this non-parametric regression line we see some decrease after the 2015 maybe till 2020, and then we see a limited, very small, extremely small improvement in the last year. But since this improvement is so small, we can conclude that the graph is pretty linear. The last variable that we have analyzed is the civil participatory index. This variable measures the easiness of the civil society to the public sphere and to the political sphere. How much civil society has influence on politics and influence on the public sphere. How much politics and those in power are constrained or are limited or are influenced by civil society in general. Here we can spot somewhat more linearity. If we have a look at the picture above, we have a sigma value of 0.075. That coefficient is not below the 0.05 we require to label our data as linear, but is near that level. We remember from the previous graphs and tables that the sigma was very high. Situation, we are in a better position. In the table below, we see that the coefficients are both positive. We have a coefficient beta that is 0.2 and the coefficient on the left is 0.005. Both the coefficients show that is a somewhat limited improvement. But we have to be cautious because the sigma level here is not below the 0.05 required, but we are there. So we have prepared again a graph showing a parametric test because our sigma level was near but not under the 0.05 required, and in the non-parametric regression graph we see that there is some improvement after the 2016. This improvement can be spotted in the years 2016 till the year 2020. After that, in the last 2 years, there is again a decline, but its decline does not erase the improvement that the
previous
period.
achieved.
So we can tell that in civil small but spottable we have a small improvement, and this is the only variable of the variables we have analyzed before that we can see some improvements. So in general we can safely state that there are not improvement in the Western Balkan democracy this last decade. This region is at the crossroad and this path to democracy is unsure. Maybe it can decline also, and maybe it can turn back to authoritarianism. Thank you and bye.